I want to start today's deep dive somewhere a little weird. I want to start with a receipt.
A receipt, like for a sandwich.
Sort of a metaphor, yeah. I'm looking at this stack of research we've pulled together on, medical negligence, Florida law, administrative systems, and honestly, it all boils down to a receipt.
Ah.
Or, I guess, a lack of one.
Okay, I think I see where you're going with this. You're talking about the social contract.
Exactly. That big, kind of dusty concept we all skimmed over in civics class, Locke, Rousseau, all that. We tend to think of it as this vague, patriotic vibe.
Right.
But looking at this paper we have, Restitution versus Protection, it reframes the social contract in a way that, well, it actually made me sit up and pay attention. It suggests it's not a vibe. It's a transaction.
It is a transaction.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty bold opening for a policy paper. The source argues that society isn't just a random group of people, it's a deal. We, the citizens, gave up the state of nature.
We gave up the freedom to do literally whatever we want.
Drive 100 miles an hour, practice surgery without a license. We accepted the risk that the state can regulate us.
So we paid with our absolute freedom.
We did. And in exchange, we're supposed to get something back. The government isn't a benefactor. It's not some rich uncle handing out charity. The source uses a very specific legal term here. The government is a fiduciary.
A fiduciary, I've heard that, but it's usually about, financial advisors. It means they have a legal obligation to act in your best interest.
That's it, precisely. The argument here is that the state has a fiduciary duty to protect us from the very risks we let them regulate. If we let them control who gets to be a doctor, they owe us a guarantee that the doctors are safe. That's the receipt for our citizenship.
And that brings us to the core tension of this entire deep dive. Because what happens when you don't get the receipt? What happens when that protection fails?
Then you have a breach of contract.
And that breach brings us to a very specific, very heated battleground in Florida. It involves statute section 768.21, subsection 8. Now, I know statutes can sound boring, but this one is infamous.
Oh, it is. If you follow legal reform, this is the third rail of Florida medical law.
Absolutely. But before we get into the weeds, we have to set a ground rule. There was a specific instruction in our source material today about terminology. There's a very popular, very emotionally charged slang term that the media and advocates use to describe this law, and we are not going to use it.
And it's important to say why. It's not about censorship. It's about clarity. The source argues that slang term, the one that implies the law creates a certain type of victim, is a rhetorical trap.
A trap how?
It simplifies a really complex issue into a bumper sticker. And if we use the buzzword, we stop thinking about the actual mechanics of the system. So we're sticking to the facts. We'll call it Subsection 8 or the Wrongful Death Act exemption.
Fair enough. We're here to analyze the machinery, not the marketing. So let's look at this machinery. What exactly is the uncomfortable reality around this Florida statute?
Well, the statute is an outlier. Florida's Wrongful Death Act generally lets survivors sue for damages when a loved one dies because of negligence. But Subsection 8 carves out this massive exception.
Okay.
If the victim is over 25 and they don't have a spouse or any minor children, their surviving adult children or parents can't sue for non-economic damages.
And non-economic damages, that's lawyer speak for pain and suffering, right? The emotional toll.
Correct. I mean, they can technically sue for funeral expenses, maybe a lost inheritance, but in a lot of cases, especially with elderly victims, those economic numbers are tiny. The real value of the case, legally speaking, is in the pain and suffering.
So by barring that, the law basically bars the whole lawsuit.
It does. Because no lawyer can afford to take the case. So for almost 4 decades, you've had this huge movement of families marching, lobbying, trying to repeal this subsection. They want their day in court.
It seems straightforward. The law blocks them, so they want to kill the law.
It does seem straightforward. But here is the uncomfortable reality that the paper points out. And I should warn you, this part is, it's really hard to swallow.
Okay.
The source claims that if you look at the people who are currently protesting, the families holding signs in Tallahassee right now, the vast majority of them would get absolutely no benefit even if the law were repealed today.
Wait, walk me through that. That doesn't make any intuitive sense. If they repeal the law that stopped them from suing, why can't they sue?
It all comes down to procedure. The legal system is bound by time in a way that our emotions aren't. The source breaks it down into 2 immutable facts. First, you have statutes of limitation.
The clock.
The clock is always running. In medical malpractice, that window is notoriously tight. It's usually 2 years in Florida from when the incident happened or was discovered. Many of these advocates have been fighting this for 5, 10, even 20 years.
So their legal claims expired a decade ago.
A long time ago.
Okay, that covers the long-term advocates. But what about people whose cases are more recent? Or what if the repeal somehow opens a new window?
That brings us to the second fact, non-retroactivity. In the U.S. legal system, big changes to liability laws almost never look backward. If the legislature repeals Subsection 8 in 2026, it only applies to deaths that happen after the law changes in 2026.
It doesn't go back in time.
It doesn't go back and unlock the courthouse for a death that happened in 2024.
That is, honestly, that's devastating.
It is.
You have these people, carrying this immense, heavy grief. They're channeling all of it into this one political battle. They believe they are fighting for their own justice, for their own day in court.
Right.
But the source is saying that day in court is a mirage. It's physically impossible for the law to give them what they're asking for.
It's the central tragedy of this entire movement. They're chasing a remedy, a civil lawsuit, that is procedurally is unavailable to them.
So why do they do it? I mean, if I knew changing a law wouldn't help my specific case, I might still support it, but I don't know if I'd dedicate my life to it.
Well, that's where the motivation shifts. If you talk to the advocates or you read their testimony, the refrain is almost always the same. We're doing this so it never happens to anyone else.
Never again.
Right. It's altruism born from grief. They want prevention. But this is where the paper draws its sharpest line, and this is where we really need to pay attention. There's a fundamental mismatch between the goal prevention and the tool they're fighting for.
Restitution.
Restitution, exactly.
Okay, let's dig into this, because I think this is where most people, myself included, get tripped up. We assume that lawsuits are prevention. We assume if you sue a bad doctor for $10 million, it stops them from being a bad doctor.
Or at least scares other doctors into being good. It's the deterrence theory. And on paper, it makes a lot of sense. You punish the behavior stops.
But the source argues that in modern healthcare, that feedback loop is broken.
Completely broken. First, just look at what a lawsuit is. It's retrospective.
It's looking in the rearview mirror.
By definition, you cannot file a wrongful death suit until there is a dead body. You can't sue for an injury that almost happened, so as a safety tool, it is always late. It's a cleanup crew, not a security guard.
Okay, but doesn't the fear of the cleanup crew make the doctor more careful?
In theory, yeah. But the source points out that malpractice insurance insulates the practitioner from that financial shock. The doctor isn't writing the check.
The insurance carrier is?
And maybe more importantly, settlements often come with non-disclosure agreements, NDAs. So the facts get buried. The payout happens, but the lesson isn't learned by the wider system.
So the bad actor just stays in the system, but with higher premiums.
Exactly. And this brings us to the better tool. If the courts are the rearview mirror, who is supposed to be looking through the windshield?
Administrative agencies.
The Department of Health. The Board of Medicine. The source argues these are the only bodies designed for prospective protection. They're the only ones with the legal mandate to intervene before a tragedy.
Respective. That's the key word here.
It's everything. A functioning regulator doesn't need a dead patient to act. They can look at data. They can see, hey, Dr. Smith has had 5 complaints about hygiene in 6 months.
They can see a pattern.
They can audit. They can demand retraining. They can suspend a license. They can stop Dr. Smith from going into the operating room next Tuesday.
Right.
A lawsuit can never, ever do that.
This actually connects to that political flashpoint in the notes. In 2025, Florida Governor DeSantis vetoed a bill that would have repealed this very statute.
He did.
And the reaction was, furious. People saw it as him siding with insurance companies. But if you actually look at his veto letter, which the source highlights, his reasoning aligns almost perfectly with this whole argument.
It's a really nuanced point that got lost in the outrage. He basically said that just expanding the pool of people who can sue doesn't make the medical system safer.
It just changes who gets paid after the failure.
Right. And he pivoted. He said we should be focusing on strengthening the regulatory agencies.
He was saying, don't ask for better lawsuits, ask for better government.
Exactly. Whether you agree with his politics or not, that structural argument holds water. Expanding liability is not the same thing as expanding safety.
Which brings us to this idea in the paper of 2 models of justice. I found this really helpful for kind of visualizing the whole conflict.
Yeah, Model 1 is retrospective justice. That's the courts.
And let's be fair to Model 1. It offers something the agencies just can't. It offers validation.
Huge emotional validation. There's a courtroom, a judge, a winner and a loser. You get to point a finger at the person who hurt you and have a jury say, you were wrong. The source acknowledges that's powerful, it's vindication.
But its limitation is scope.
Right. It solves your case. It might get you money. But it's an individual remedy for a systemic risk. It's like fixing one pothole after you ruin your tire, but ignoring that the whole road was crumbling.
So then we have Model 2, prospective protection. The state.
This model measures success in a completely different way. It doesn't measure success in millions of dollars awarded. It measures success in lives not lost.
That is a terribly difficult metric to sell. Lives not lost it's a hypothetical.
It's the invisible metric. It's the whole paradox of prevention. When a regulator does their job perfectly, when they pull a dangerous doctor's license, nothing happens.
Literally nothing.
A patient goes to a different doctor and just comes home safe. A surgery goes well. There's no headline, there's no press conference that says grandmother doesn't die on Tuesday.
It's the dog that didn't bark.
Precisely. And because it's invisible, it's so hard to campaign on. You can't rally families around, let's improve the audit protocols of the Board of Medicine.
It doesn't fit on a protest sign.
But that's where the real safety lives. That is where the fiduciary duty of the government lives. That's the receipt we talked about at the very beginning.
This leads to what I think is the most provocative part of the source material. It calls for a complete redefinition of how we see ourselves as citizens. A shift from plaintiff to principal.
I love this framing. It's such a challenge to the listener.
So break it down for us. What's the plaintiff in waiting?
The plaintiff in waiting is kind of the default setting for most of us. We view the government as this separate thing. We go about our lives, and we only engage with it when we get hurt.
Then we show up and ask for help.
We approach the bench, literally or metaphorically, and we ask for permission to sue. Please, judge, let me seek damages. It's a posture of submission. You're the victim asking the authority for a remedy.
Okay.
But the new view, the citizen as principal, it flips the whole hierarchy upside down.
Principal, meaning what? Like the principal of a school?
No, more like the principal in a business deal. Agency theory. The principal is the owner, the agent is the employee. The source is arguing that in a republic, the citizens are the principals. The government agencies, they're our employees.
So we shouldn't be asking for permission to sue. We should be hauling them into the office for a performance review.
Exactly. The argument is petition for performance, not permission. If the Department of Health is failing, the solution isn't just letting people sue the bad doctors. It's demanding to know why our employee, the Department of Health, is asleep at the wheel.
It just changes the energy completely. Instead of saying, let me sue Dr. X, you say, Department of Health, why did you license Dr. X when he had 3 settlements in another state?
That is the principal mindset. And the source actually lists some specific actionable demands that come from this. And I have to warn you, they are incredibly boring.
The best solutions usually are, it's never sexy.
It's not. We're talking about things like transparent reporting.
So we can actually see who's getting in trouble.
Right. Currently, in a lot of states, doctor disciplinary records are buried. A principal would demand a clean, easy-to-use dashboard of every single doctor on probation.
What else is on the list?
Real investigations into repeat complaints. The source notes that often, complaints are treated as one-offs. A principal would demand that the software connects the dots. If 3 people complain about the same surgeon, boom, it triggers an automatic external audit.
External audits, that's another one.
Yes. Who watches the watchers? The source suggests regular third-party audits of the licensing board itself to make sure they aren't just protecting their own.
It's basically middle management stuff. It's compliance, it's auditing.
It is. But think about the leverage. If you sue one doctor, you might win that one case after 5 years. If you force the licensing board to implement an automatic trigger for repeat offenders, you might save 1,000 patients over the next decade.
An audit is infinitely more powerful than a lawsuit.
Infinitely.
So why don't we do it? If this is so obvious, why is the movement 99% focused on the lawsuit, on repealing the statute, and almost silent on administrative reform?
The source offers a fascinating psychological take on this. It comes down to narrative.
We like stories.
We need stories. Suing a doctor gives you a clear villain. Dr. X did this to my mom. I want to face Dr. X. It has emotional clarity, a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Whereas fixing the Department of Health
is a bureaucratic slog. There's no single villain. It's a system failure. It's data, spreadsheets, oversight meetings. As the source says, one feels like justice, the other feels like work.
One feels like justice, the other feels like work. That lines up with everything we know about psychology. We want the catharsis.
But the expert in me has to point out the historical precedent here. The source brings up aviation.
Oh, right. Plane crashes.
Think about it. Air travel is the safest form of transport in human history. How did it get that way? Was it because families sued airlines after crashes?
I mean, they did sue, big time.
They absolutely sued, and they got huge settlements. But the lawsuits didn't fix the engines. The lawsuits didn't change air traffic control protocols.
The NTSB did that. The FAA did that.
Exactly. Relentless institutional scrutiny. Every time a plane went down, a government body protection tore it apart to find out why, and then changed the rules for everyone to make sure it couldn't happen that way again.
They didn't just pay the victims, they inoculated the system.
And the source argues that medicine shouldn't be any different. We treat medical error like a private dispute between a doctor and a patient, when we should be treating it like a plane crash, a system failure that needs a system fix.
That is the core argument.
It is.
So bringing this all back to the families in Florida, is the source saying they should stop fighting the law? Is it saying don't repeal Subsection 8?
No, and that is a crucial distinction. The paper explicitly says it is not defending the fairness of the law. It acknowledges the law is harsh. What it is arguing is that repeal is a false promise for safety.
It's a distraction.
In a strategic sense, yeah. If advocates spend 40 years fighting for the right to sue, but spend 0 days fighting for a medical board that actually revokes licenses, they might win the moral victory of repeal, but they won't achieve the practical victory of safety.
They won't stop the next death.
It's about aligning the means with the ends. If the end goal is save lives, the means has to be regulatory reform. True justice, the source argues, isn't to check you cash. It's a system that works. It's ensuring the government does the job it was created to do.
It really reframes the whole tragedy. It turns the advocates from victims asking for help into bosses demanding competence.
And that is a much more powerful position to be in. It empowers you. You aren't begging, you're auditing.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? Maybe you aren't in Florida, maybe you haven't dealt with this, but this concept of plaintiff versus principal applies to everything.
It applies to environmental protection. If a factory pollutes the river, do we just want the right to sue them after the fact, or do we want an EPA that stops them beforehand?
It applies to banking regulations, to school safety. We spend so much time debating how to punish people when things go wrong.
And very little time auditing the systems that are supposed to prevent things from going wrong in the first place.
Yeah.
We wait for the failure, and then we ask the courts to clean it up.
The source leaves us with this idea that we need to stop waiting. We need to look at the government agencies, those boring, faceless buildings, and remember that we signed a contract with them. They owe us protection, not just restitution.
And if they aren't delivering, we shouldn't just be asking for the right to sue the guy who hurt us. We should be asking why the agency let him hurt us in the first place.
It's a shift from seeking a payout to ensuring prevention. And ultimately, that's the only way to honor that never again promise.
It's the harder path, for sure, but it's the only one that actually leads to safety.
I want to leave you with a thought today that really stuck with me from this deep dive. We often feel powerless against big systems. We feel like the little guys fighting giants. But if you take this principle mindset seriously, you aren't the little guy. You're the employer.
That changes the dynamic completely.
So here's the question to chew on. If you stopped thinking of yourself as a potential victim waiting for a lawsuit and started thinking of yourself as the boss of the regulatory agencies, how would your demands to your government change tomorrow? Would you still be asking for permission? Or would you start demanding performance?
That's the question.
Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive. We'll see you next time.